Hello everyone, my name is Keith and I run the Global Test Center for Barclays. I've been involved in software testing for nearly 20 years and lived and worked in Europe and Asia for almost half of that time. I speak to hundreds of testers every year, and very often I hear software testers speaking about what the goal or mission of testing should be. And fairly frequently I hear, oftentimes amplified through the vast echo chamber of the testing industry, that the mission of testing, or at least one of the objectives of testing, is confidence. Now, by definition, confidence is the quality or state of being certain. It's knowing that something can be proved true. And our confidence is a byproduct of actions taken in the process of acquiring that proof. Testers should be constantly vigilant against all forms of bias, but especially confirmation bias. The first problem with making confidence your mission is that it almost guarantees you will be seeking information to give your stakeholders certainty instead of information that might give them pause for thought. Some of our most valuable tools as skilled testers are our ability to question, think critically, and take a skeptical view about what we've observed. We should always resist the urge to intentionally cloud our judgment, and making confidence the mission of testing would be directly fogging the headlights of your project. Now, as an example, speaking about the recent 3-hour NASDAQ outage, Peter Atwater, who's the president of Financial Insights, said this: "Changes in confidence alter what we believe to be true, and in turn our preferences and actions. Highly confident people and organizations embrace innovation and new technology, believing there is unlimited opportunity ahead." Now, while complexity might be blamed for last week's NASDAQ outage, overconfidence was at the root of the problem. For those managing and regulating businesses, it is time to better understand the role confidence plays in all that we do. Now, maybe it's due to my own tendency towards skepticism, but I get really uncomfortable telling anyone that anything is certain. That is especially true when it comes to software testing and interpreting the results of our efforts. There are just too many variables that impact the control and validity of the output, and that's just limited to what we can know, let alone the things we don't know. To paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld, there are known knowns, there are things we know that we know, there are known unknowns, that is to say, there are things that we now know we don't know, but there are also unknown unknowns. There are things we don't know we don't know. And those great unknown unknowns loom in the shadows, waiting to rear their head and question our approach and, as well, shake our confidence. In a recent article about confidence in Forbes magazine, a study was quoted of anesthesiologists that found one of the most frequent cognitive errors was premature closure of the initial diagnosis due to overconfidence. Once the physician made a diagnosis, they did not revisit it, and this has led to errors. In making critical decisions, you should always question your assumptions, biases, and knowledge. Everyone perceives a situation differently, and your interpretation can be wrong. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hang on there, Keith. Respected people in the industry, unusually tall industry experts, and large international organizations for the advancement of software testing have said exactly the opposite to what you are now asserting. You may even hear them say things like, coverage metrics can measure confidence. Or even more impressive, confidence can be established across a multi-dimensional framework. Wow, that sounds really impressive. And I'm sure that people who are making those claims absolutely believe what they're saying is true. Unfortunately, those claims don't stand up to scrutiny or critical analysis. So in my opinion, those claims would fall under the category of pseudoscience, or what's commonly referred to as marketing. Now, I agree that it is an extremely attractive value proposition to sell confidence. And I'm sure it sells itself. Promising confidence feeds directly on potential weaknesses in our character, on things like vanity, naivete, and even dishonesty. Marketing confidence as an objective of testing is akin to elements of classic confidence tricks, like the Spanish prisoner and fortune-telling frauds, offering immeasurable and extremely fragile benefits preys on our own vanity and the power of wish thinking, or believing something is true because we so desperately want it to be true. It sounds like it should be true. Man, do we want it to be true. But once we realize that the goal is unachievable, we're too embarrassed to admit that we've been duped by a solution looking for a problem. Another example of misplaced confidence can be found in the financial crisis of 2008. Then U.S. Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson said, today there is a lack of confidence in our financial system, a lack of confidence that must be conquered. Now that statement may have some elements of truth from the perspective of someone who has deeply vested interests in settling markets, but more importantly, completely ignores the root cause of overabundance of confidence leading up to the financial collapse. Now, marketing confidence from a political or economic perspective makes perfect sense when you're selling a position or product and wish to create a sense of urgency to get people to respond. But it's highly inappropriate when trying to see things objectively. But wait, you say, shouldn't we want to have confidence in our testing? Don't we need to have confidence in our products and systems? Isn't it important to have confidence in our decisions? Of course we want confidence in our products and testing. But if you make gaining that confidence your mission, in my opinion, you are intentionally adding confusion to the decision-making process. And my good friend Michael Bolton has compared making confidence the mission of testing as a sort of goal displacement. Now, goal displacement occurs when the formal goals of an organization are replaced by new objectives that reflect the interest of the leaders or individuals. Confidence may be what your management wants to have for various personal and professional reasons, but using testing to achieve that goal directly skews its observational proficiency. So take for an example this simple illustration of why we shouldn't trust our observations in even the most benign of circumstances. Now everyone can see that squares A and B are different shades of gray, with A being clearly darker than B. But look what happens when we deconstruct the picture. Even though you can now see that A and B are the same color, your mind still perceives them as different shades. This is what's known as White's illusion, or some people refer to as Munker-White's illusion, and demonstrates that your brain and eyes perceive color in context, not as absolutes. Further to this point, in an effort to explain overconfidence, Nobel Prize-winning economist Daniel Kahneman talks about what he calls "what you see is all there is." This theory states that when the mind makes decision, it deals primarily with the Rumsfeldian known knowns that it is already observed. He explains that humans fail to account for complexity, and that our understanding of the world consists of small and not necessarily representative sets of observation. Quote, overconfident professionals sincerely believe that they have expertise, act as experts, and look like experts. You will have to struggle to remind yourself that they may be in the grip of an illusion. Kahneman goes on to warn about confidence as an attraction to coherence, which quickly leads to overconfidence. He says, the confidence we experience as we make a judgment is not a reasoned evaluation of the probability that it is right. Confidence is feeling, one determined mostly by coherence of the story and by the ease with which it comes to mind, even when the evidence of the story is sparse and unreliable. The bias towards coherence favors overconfidence. An individual who expresses high confidence probably has a good story, which may or may not be true. So, do you still love testing for confidence? Not convinced? I know we all love feeling confident, but let's hear what someone says who knows a lot about what it means to know something. The theoretical physicist Richard Feynman said, I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers that may be wrong. I have approximate answers and possible beliefs and different degrees of uncertainty about different things, but I am not absolutely sure of anything. And there are many things I don't know anything about. Aside from Feynman's approach to life, this quote speaks directly as to why in testing, the use of heuristics is vitally important. James Bach defines a heuristic as a fallible method of solving a problem or making a decision. Now, heuristics are useful in solving testing problems because they are helpful without causing overconfidence. Fallibility is built into the model, which is central to the mission of testing. Further to this, Michael Bolton has stated that all oracles are heuristic, so even the models we use to recognize problems are fallible. Using that as a framework to approach a testing problem, how inappropriate would it be to state confidence as one of the desired outcomes? In his blog post, Confidence and Uncertainty, tester extraordinaire Ian McCowett outlines his belief that striving for absolute certainty is the equivalent of trying to count to infinity. In relation to software testing, he says, in testing, the danger we encounter is when we blur the distinction between epistemic and psychological certainty. 99% of the tests pass. Does this provide a case to increase our confidence? No. We've found and fixed 1,000 bugs? No. A warrant might justify a belief, but we should be wary of seeing ourselves providing warrants that increase psychological certainty. Confidence, or certainty, is not a misguided objective of testing, it's also impossible to obtain. So now you're thinking, okay, smarty pants, if confidence is not the mission of testing, what is the mission of testing? In essence, information. Information obtained as objectively as possible. And objectively is defined as uninfluenced by emotion or personal prejudices. Objective information is required for your stakeholders to make the best decisions possible. Information about what's working, what's not working, and what we feel are risks to potentially go wrong in the future. Information about the context of how and why we are testing, what was conducted, and what we observed in the process of its execution. If that information gives someone confidence in the system or our testing, that's great. But let's not confuse the mission and willingly open ourselves up to all the bias that goes with confidence. So, if testing is questioning a system in order to evaluate it, how do we go about that evaluation, and what types of information are we looking for as a result? So I use this diagram to help illustrate to testers where they should be focusing their energy. After all the variables we can consider are taken into account for context, we can then evaluate our approach against the cost-quality-time triangle in order to help us gauge risk. So when we're looking at cost, we want to be as transparent as possible to our stakeholders about where their money, time, and resources are being spent, so that they can make good decisions about where to spend it in the future. When it comes to quality, one of our goals is accuracy. Understanding the different perspectives of all our stakeholders and what they believe to be and perceive to be the quality objectives for the software or project is vitally important, so that we can help gauge whether or not they have achieved those objectives. People have different views as to what quality means and how it's interpreted within the context of that project. So it's really important to understand those different perspectives and try and be as accurate as possible in getting information to them so they can decide if that's been achieved. When it comes to time, we want to be incredibly efficient with the resources that we have, whether they be money, and we're using our time wisely with the money that we've been given, whether it's technology or whether it's people. Making sure we're efficient with our time is a big objective, because we know complete testing is impossible, and more often than not, time will be restricted or taken away from us. So being efficient with what we have, make sure we're applying risk models to the tasks we select, is incredibly important. Off the back of the tests that we've run come different types of information. And I usually group these into categories of bugs, risks, and issues. Typically, people identify defects as bugs as differences between perceived expected behavior and actual or observed behavior of a system or a piece of software from a functional or non-functional perspective. That, to me, only solves half of the testing problem. Larger things and things that have direct impact on your production environment are information around what we observe that might be potential risks to the business, or issues, problems that have been observed that don't necessarily relate to just strictly functional deviations between perceived expected behavior. If we focus our energy on a complete set of observations will more likely be able to give information to our stakeholders that help them make decisions. Anything less than focusing on those three aspects is the equivalent of hitting the bullseye on the wrong target. So, putting aside my own bias, I think a lot of what you hear from the testing industry is just pure nonsense. Straw men are built in order to create markets so vendors can sell services. Solutions looking for problems. Confidence can't be measured, even across a multi-dimensional framework. Just like having certified staff is not a competitive advantage. Now, we must be ever vigilant against politicians who would cheapen, box up, and commoditize our craft, and in turn, further diminish its value in the eyes of our stakeholders. Making confidence the mission of testing goes a long way towards those objectives by introducing heaps of confirmation bias, undermining organizations through goal displacement, and giving us unwarranted senses of false security. So, should confidence be the mission of testing? Unfortunately not. Now, some may view me as overly skeptical, and that's fine. I would rather err on the side of caution and, in my opinion, humility when seeking information for my stakeholders. It's up to them to decide what to do with what I give them. Objectively finding it is hard enough without attempting to gain credibility through inappropriate means. But if you do decide to make confidence your mission, manage your own expectations. Do not be surprised when you are suddenly confronted by the "we didn't catch this in test" crowd. Don't stare in wonderment when the very people you tried to make feel confident in their products turn on you when things go wrong. You told them they should feel confident. You used the fallible testing process to support those feelings without regard to reality. Make confidence the mission of testing and proceed with caution. So when someone asks me if they should give confidence through their testing, my simple advice to them is stick to the mission. Thank you.